Yo! It's been a while. Welcome back to the stream, I guess. So today I'm going to be testing my stream setup and doing a few things. I'm building some, assembling some things for the store. So I wanted to go ahead and do a test of the stream setup because since I last streamed, I moved to a new house. A bunch of different things happened, and I know I pretty much completely fell off the map as far as live streaming and all that sort of stuff. And I would like to get back to it to some degree. I'm not sure how regular this is going to be, but it's something that I'd like to do more. I really enjoyed streaming, and I've been kind of on hiatus for as far as like doing these sorts of projects and even taking customer orders for mods and things like that, due to a combination of a lot of different events that have kind of come together to just make it impractical for me to be able to work on this hobby over the past year, pretty much. But things are kind of changing a little bit for me, and I think I'm going to be able to work out my priorities in a way that I can focus on this a little bit more. So today is really just about testing the setup. I've got some new gear for the stream setup. Since I moved into a new house, I completely redid my entire setup here. So it's a lot of things that just need to get tested and make sure that they're working. So I figured that while I'm testing, I would go ahead and do some soldering. I'm going to be assembling, doing the final assembly on some of these Super Nintendo RGB bypass plus de-jitter boards. This is probably going to be the last batch of them that I do for a long time. The chip shortage has made the little CPLDs that go into these extremely rare, extremely hard to get. So I don't know that I'll be making another batch of these for a long time. This is probably going to be the last ones that go onto my store, at least for the next year. Well, at least for the foreseeable future. Probably for a year, I'm guessing, because the stock situation is just horrible for these CPLDs. I mean, what else is new? It's terrible for everything. But one of the things I wanted to demonstrate here is there was recently Voltar did a video recently on the N64 Advanced installation where he demonstrated some drag soldering techniques, and that reminded me that I wanted to do a demonstration of the drag soldering techniques that I use, because I think that specifically it comes down to the type of tip that I recommend using for drag soldering and the technique that you use to effectively drag solder. I use a method and a tip configuration that I don't really see very often, but if I can explain why I do, I think it'll become clear that the way that I do it is very easy, especially for beginners, to get up to speed on doing. And I feel that some of the advice that you receive, and I'm not trying to call out Voltar here, I mean, Voltar, he does a really good job of demonstrating methods that are easy for new people, beginners, to try out, and he does this in a very easy to approach way. But I do think that some of the advice that is given out that seems like it would be easy for a beginner ends up actually making it harder for a beginner to get used to doing these more advanced techniques, and in a way, not intentionally, but in a way, I think it kind of gatekeeps people to a certain degree from getting into this kind of more advanced soldering work, because they look at it and maybe they try a method that seems like it would be easy on its face, but then they have bad results, and it discourages people from building their skills further. So I want to demonstrate a few things here that I do that are very easy for anybody to get used to, and you know, go from there. Oh, hey, not RG. I guess is your name, Arjai. I am doing well. Just trying to get back to doing more tech-related stuff. So, but I appreciate the sentiment there. All right, so what I'm going to be demonstrating here is a soldering method that I've been using for a few years now, which is a drag soldering procedure that uses a large knife-style tip. This is actually the easiest way that I have ever found to do drag soldering is with this knife-type tip, like this. This is a huge soldering tip, and I think a lot of people would look at this and think, you know, drag soldering small surface mount leads would just be like completely impossible with this. But actually, this is a very easy method for soldering fine pitch SMD components. And I'll explain the reason why, but I want to demonstrate basically how it works first, and then we'll go through the why. So I'm going to start by soldering one of these CPLDs in place. The pin pitch is not super fine on these, so it's not like the most difficult thing to solder, but it's a good way to demonstrate how it works. And then we'll go and solder in the THS 7473 here, which has a much finer pin pitch. And I think that'll demonstrate the ease of this process really well. This is not the normal method that I use to assemble these boards, by the way. Normally I use solder paste and a hot air rework station, but for the purposes of demonstrating the concept from the soldering perspective, I'm going to be hand soldering this batch today. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to take our iron and clean it off really well so that you don't have any residual solder on the iron. And then we are going to get one of our chips in place here. And I would normally use a suction device, a pump, to lift these components out of the tray and get them in place, but that thing's kind of loud, so I don't think it'd be very good for the stream. So we've got our chip positioned in place, and what we're going to do first is we're going to take a little bit of no clean flux, and we're going to flux the entire area. Then we're going to take our tip that's clean, and we're going to add just a little bit of solder to the tip. Not much, just a tiny amount. And then what we're going to do is, while holding the chip in place, we're just going to tack down, one of the legs. Okay. Let me get you zoomed in a little bit more. Let's see here. So we've tacked down a corner leg of this chip, just with a little bit of solder, and that's going to keep it in place so that we can move on to the next corner to make sure that the chip stays in place while we're doing the rest of the drag soldering move. So we're going to add just a smidge more solder to our tip here, and then we're going to tack down this other side here. Whoops, sorry, you couldn't see that. So we just tacked down that side as well. So now what we're going to do is just move on to another edge here, and we're just going to take and add a little bit more solder to our tip here, and we're going to clean that tip off, and then we're going to add a little bit more solder to the tip, and then we're going to take more flux, and we're just going to start dragging that across. So you're going to see that the solder naturally wicks up onto the pins. And even with a massive surface area like this tip has, as long as you're using a lot of flux, you can actually get that solder to wick up onto those pins and pads without bridging too badly, even with a massive tip. And that's what I think a lot of people misunderstand. Using a small tip is not necessarily a good thing. The tip is basically it's a thermal area. It's like a surface area of high temperature that can pull and wick that solder away. So having a larger tip is actually beneficial for drag soldering compared to having a small fine tip, because you have more thermal area that the solder can wick onto. So you can take solder on a chip like this, and you can, just by adding some flux and bringing this large tip in here, you can wick away excess solder from the pins and eliminate bridges. So you saw I created a bridge there, but just by working the soldering iron through, we can actually remove those bridges, because that solder naturally wants to move onto this large thermal area that you have on this big tip. So if we move on to the next edge here, add a little bit of solder, or add a little flux, and then take our soldering tip again. We're just going to do the same maneuver again, just back and forth. And then you might want to clean your tip. This actually looks pretty good, but there's like this little tail here that I don't like. And then that's good. And then we'll move up to the next one. Always just adding flux. Flux is your friend here. Flux is what makes this possible, because it keeps that solder moving the whole time. And last corner here. So we're just going to hit this one, same as before. And this one's a little bit more difficult because of the design of the PCB. There are some surface mount resistors and a capacitor that are close to this edge, so that's one thing about a large tip like this, is getting into tight spaces can be a challenge. But if you try again, you'll persevere. Now see, we've got a bridge here. And for this, we're just going to clean our tip, get it really clean. And then we're just going to come back in here. And as you can see, all that solder just pulls right up onto the tip and off of the board, off of those legs of that chip. So that makes it incredibly easy. You don't need any kind of fancy technique here to make this happen. It's just a matter of using the surface area that you have available to you on this tip to basically move that solder to where it needs to go. And there is a small bridge over here. We're going to clear that. And all we have to do to clear it is heat it up. And that solder naturally will just jump to the tip from that chip. So that's pretty much all there is to that. Let's go ahead and do this even finer THS 7374. How does my audio sound, by the way? I've switched from a dedicated microphone to actually using the microphones built into my camera because I did some recorded tests, but I haven't actually heard it myself through the YouTube stream process and everything. Does it sound good? Or should I go back to having a separate dedicated mic? Okay, so we're going to get a THS 7374 here. Oops. Fumbled that one. See, this is why I like to use the vacuum pump for moving components around so that you don't end up throwing them all over the place. Oh, great. The audio is good, because the other streams I had a Blue Yeti hooked up that I could kind of like set over to the side there, and I was doing some testing with the camera, the built-in microphone of my camera, which is an A7 III, and I realized it sounded pretty good just right off camera, so I was wanting to test not having to have the separate mic set up and see if that would work out okay for me. So good to hear that it sounds good. Okay, so here with this one, it's the same concept. You've got this chip in place. You're going to get it exactly where you want it. Okay, looks good. Now we're just going to, I've already put some solder on the tip here. Now for this one, since it's just a two-sided chip, I didn't bother to tack one corner then tack the other corner, because it's really not necessary here. There's not a lot of alignment problems that you can get. Once you got it aligned pretty well on one side, you can pretty much just go for it, you know, solder the whole thing. But same thing here. Now you can see I've deposited a lot of solder onto there. So what I'm going to do now is, again, just add some more flux, clean the tip, and then clean the tip again, add more flux, and you just basically rinse and repeat until you get all the bridges cleared. It's all about surface tension. Everything that you're doing in soldering is surface tension. So you just work it until you get that solder moved where you want it. And that's basically it. So that bridge is cleared. Then we need to work on this other side a little bit more, because I didn't actually get all of those pins soldered originally. So I'm going to add a little tiny bit more solder to my tip, and then I'm going to go in here, basically just do the same maneuver. And you can see that is cleared now. So that pretty much covers what I was going to try to go through here, just on soldering surface mount components. The thing is that like I said, I wouldn't normally build my boards like this. Normally I would use solder paste, but there are certain circumstances where that's not practical, like on my Wii HDMI boards. The solder paste that I use just doesn't get fine enough. It ends up bridging, and then I have to hand solder these anyway. So whenever I build these, I just hand solder the FPGA onto there, because using the solder paste is just an extra step that ends up not yielding good results anyway. So I hand solder these, which is part of why I don't sell them on my store, because it's just too much work to hand solder each one of them for production to sell them in large quantities. But I am actually working on a batch of these, so I may actually end up selling a small, just like one small batch of these on my store. But that's not that's not a guarantee yet, but it may happen. I know I've had a lot of people email me and comment on things asking about the Wii HDMI mod, and the main problem with it is just that it's such a pain to assemble those, and it's just not very practical for me to sell them, unfortunately. The thing is, a lot of my components, like if you look at this this Wii HDMI board. It comes with pre-populated with all like the resistors and capacitors and stuff like that. But the stuff that's not populated, that my board manufacturer can populate resistors and capacitors and diodes and stuff like that. So I don't have to assemble each individual component, but all the major components like the memory, the flash memory for the system, the voltage regulator, the FPGA, the FFC connectors, all that stuff, the HDMI connector. I have to solder all of that stuff myself, and so it's a lot of work. So it's not very enticing for me to do. But anyway, so now that we've soldered together this particular one, we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna de-panel this one. And then I'm gonna show programming and testing. So there's one more step on these RGB bypass plus de-jitter mods, and that's to add a crystal, a clock crystal. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you how they how I program and test them. Okay, that's the clock crystal in place. We're just going to solder those two leads. And then take some cutters and cut those leads off. All right. Let me get us zoomed out here. Okay, so that's built. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and program this. We use OpenOCD. Let's see. It's OpenOCD and this FT232H chip. I did a demonstration video one time showing how to program de-jitter mods. So I'm not going to go through the whole process here. I'm just going to go ahead and fire up OpenOCD and get that part going. Okay, let's see if I can get well, that's not the correct display capture. There we go. Alright, so OpenOCD is right up here. So, basically what we do is we just put the programming pins into the programming header on here, and then we are going to go on OpenOCD. We're going to go up to the SNES de-jitter, and this has got the SC version of the firmware that has the chroma subsampling functionality built in. So we're going to go ahead and program that. Okay, so that was successfully programmed. Now we're going to test it. All right. Get our Super Nintendo here. Let's try out the B cam. Hey, it's the B cam. This is a new edition. I didn't have a B cam before. So the idea with the B cam is to demonstrate some things that are difficult to do from the top-down perspective, but it's actually not going to help here. So I've got my Super Nintendo. I've got my test jig for my Super Nintendo. I'm going to switch back to the A cam so that you can see this more close up. So the test jig for the Super Nintendo, this is how I test every one of my mods. And I'll show the test jig for my N64 as well at some point. But basically, we plug in an RGB cable, a SCART cable, and then this test jig is built for both the N64, or this is a test is built both for the RGB bypass plus de-jitter mod for the SNES, as well as just the Bordy's original SNES RGB bypass mod. So basically it's got pogo pins here for each of the connections that we need to check, and so we just pop the chip into this little slot here, and it presses down, the pogo pins press down onto the pads of the mod, and then we can just power this mod on, and you can see we have video. Now you'll notice there's some interference in this video, and that is actually normal. The reason for that is because this has a dual clock circuit. This test jig has a dual clock circuit in it. Sorry, we're not getting a good connection on the pogo pins here. There we go. Alright, so this this test jig that I built has a dual clock circuit in it so that it can test both the internal de-jitter mod on the de-jitter boards, plus it also can test the just the RGB part of the N60 or of the Super Nintendo RGB bypass. So I can do both. But because of that, there has to be a second clock signal running on this board in addition to the one that's built into the de-jitter mod, and those two clock signals interfere with each other in testing, which causes these weird interference patterns onto the screen. Your actual mod is not going to have those issues. It's just unique to this test setup because it's just a compromise that I had to make whenever I was building the test jig. But this jig allows me to quickly test completed mods without having to worry about you know, whether, like, I don't have to actually install solder wires to it or anything like that. It's all just done through this pogo setup. So we're going to go ahead and shut that down, and then you just get the chip back out, and that chip is ready to go. So that's pretty much the main stuff I wanted to show today. I guess since I mentioned it, I'll show you my N64 test jig setup as well. Let's get switched back. Okay, so the N64 test jig is a similar concept, although this is a modular design because I've got three different mods that I can test with this. The basic RGB amp comes on this card. So this is a card system. There's this portion here is soldered into the N64, so it's got all the required connections for testing all the functions of the different mods that I have, and it's got a programmer for a USB blaster. It's got a programming header. So whenever I assemble N64 mods, basically they just go get attached to one of these cards. So like this is my N64 RGB V1 test jig. So basically you take one of these N64 RGB V1 boards, press it down in place, and then this goes onto this adapter. This card adapter goes onto this main PCB, and that hooks into the N64 for all the data and analog lines that are needed to test. And this works for the N64 Advanced as well. These are basically pogo pins soldered onto a PCB. If you look here, so you got these pogo pins that poke up and contact the pads of the mod, and then those are just soldered into this PCB that has these pin headers that connect into the main PCB. And then you've got these 3D printed top plates that help align the mod and everything. So that's how that works. Just a little behind the scenes on how I assemble and test. And hopefully that was interesting. I'm really proud of my N64 setup. That's definitely, this is the newest design for a test jig that I've set up, and this is definitely the most full-featured one. And as I develop new mods that I want to have easy, convenient test setup for, I'm going to be following a pattern like this. Actually, speaking of which, I do have a test jig for the Wii that is very similar. This is the Wii Test Jig that I have. So it's a Wii, and it has a slot for the Wii HDMI board, for all the connections to the Wii HDMI board, and the programming header for the Wii HDMI. So you can, this doesn't work on this version of the Wii HDMI, so that's an old version. Let's see. But this version of the Wii HDMI, you basically just, it slots into place and then you press it down and you can program and test the video off of the Wii without having to solder anything. So it was designed back whenever I thought I might actually mass produce and sell Wii HDMIs, but that's kind of gone, that idea has kind of gone out the window. So but it is still convenient to have if I do assemble a few Wii HDMIs, because I don't have to install them to test them. But I think that just about does it for what I wanted to demonstrate today. I'm going to do some more live streams going forward. I've started accepting some customer orders for mod services again, which I basically haven't done for almost a year. So there will be some more videos coming of actually installing mods. And I've been working on some arcade hardware related stuff, so I'd like to do some live streaming of troubleshooting and repairing arcade boards, because I really enjoy doing that. I did some pretty extreme battery corrosion damage repair on some CPS2 boards a while back, and if you're on the Arcade Projects forums, you might have seen my posts about that. I'd like to live stream some of that sort of diagnostic stuff, because I mean, I sit here and do it by myself. I might as well stream and show people what I'm doing, because I mean, I'm a noob whenever it comes to diagnostics, but I have been able to figure out a lot of stuff about how these boards work, how to diagnose problems in them, and if I'm going to be doing that here by myself, I might as well stream and let some people see what my process is, and hopefully maybe that can help other people learn how to do a little diagnostic themselves. So we'll see what all I've got. I still have a few CPS2 boards that I haven't figured out yet, so I might stream some of the diagnostics on those as well, and hopefully we can get a couple of them working on stream. But I don't have a schedule set up yet for the streams, but I'm going to try to figure that out. But thanks for stopping by, everybody who did. I will be back at it more seriously in the future. We'll see you next time.